They tell me that it is bad form to begin with an apology. But if that's the case, I will apologize for apologizing. My friend Curtis says that I say I'm sorry too much. And something will happen, and I'll say, I'm sorry. And he'll say, don't say that. And of course I say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. If the sermon seems a little confusing, if it feels a little jumbled, a little unresolved, it is because I am. See, I had a plan. For these 3 weeks, as the lectionary advises, churches like ours were supposed to be sharing together, thinking together about these stories from 1 Samuel. So we started 2 weeks ago with 1 Samuel 3 and the young Samuel learning what it is to show up. You know, he might not know who or what was calling him. He might not know exactly what to do when he got there, but he keeps saying, here I am, here I am. He shows up anyway. And that's important because never underestimate the power of showing up. Oh, you remember. Last Sunday, Father's Day, Samuel grieves over the king he has anointed, Saul, like a spiritual son. But he does what it is that God asks of him anyway. He anoints young David to be a king, which is an act of revolution because Israel already has a king. You anoint my head with oil, Psalm 23 says. And because of that, David knows not only the green pastures of his shepherding days, but he also knows the valley of the shadow of death in the days when he is on the run as an outlaw. Samuel is part of that complex web of relationships that is parenting a revolution, and that includes all of us, whether we have children or not. See, if we have any hope of raising children to change the world, it will take all of us. And you realize, of course, that the world will change anyway. There's no question about that. The world will change anyway. So we might want to do our best to contribute something to the direction in which that change moves toward greater love, greater justice. Now, the plan was that on this Sunday, Pride Sunday, we would read together 1 Samuel 18 along with its companion story in Ruth 1. You've already heard Ruth 1. Thank you for the poem as well as the text this morning. And here is 1 Samuel 18. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took David that day and would not let him return home to his parents' house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, and as a result, Saul set him over the army, and all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved. Now, whatever people say about the Bible and sexual orientation or gender identity, they have to contend with these two biblical love stories beyond orientation or gender or social expectations. And I had the perfect resource. Bible scholar Tom Horner's Jonathan Loved David, published all the way back in 1978, which is 40 years ago, demonstrating that the stories of David and Jonathan and Ruth and Naomi share a common language and a common historical context with other stories about same-sex love. This wasn't an unusual thing. It was perfect for Pride Sunday. And the frosting on the cake, just to continue the metaphor, the frosting on the cake was to retrieve that image on the cover of your bulletin this morning. You take it out and take a good look at this. Thank you, Bob, for the photograph from December, about 5.5 years ago. You remember this? How many of you were there? Yeah. What a service that was. Do you remember? Place was packed. We were legally, on the first day that it was legal, we were legally marrying 25 same-sex couples in this sanctuary. There they all are. Now, just to be clear, we had been marrying same-sex couples for over 30 years. But it took the state that long to catch up with us. You know, one of the things that often happens to the church is we're kind of behind the culture, and it takes us a little while to catch up. Every so often, the culture has to catch up with us. May that be more true in the days ahead. So that was the plan. This image and these biblical stories for Pride Sunday. And then those other images started coming in. Right? Photos of children being separated from their parents, babies in cages, teenagers lined up at airports like inmates in the middle of the night. And I know this is not the first time that people of color have been forcibly taken from their parents. I know this is not the first time that people of color have been locked up in cages. And I know that images can be manipulated and misidentified. But my confusion this morning, the thing that totally derailed my perfect plan, was trying to find some way in my own mind to reconcile the image of 25 beautiful couples being lawfully united in marriage and the images of those beautiful children and their family being separated, being torn apart. How can we make sense of those two realities today? I don't know. I do know that I cannot this morning acknowledge one image without acknowledging the other, even though they're jarring. One image celebrating the uniting of families and the other, the horror of separating them. And as a congregation, we know something about this. We heard this morning from Imogene Williams some of our own history. We know, for instance, that our ancestors in this place defended Chinese immigrants when mobs were trying to force them back in their boats in Elliott Bay. We defended Japanese Americans against the executive order that put them in cages of the internment camps. Out of the experience and the loss of a young gay man, we sing, "Bring Us Home," with tears in our eyes, because we know deep in our hearts that there is no place like home, even if we haven't been there yet. We know that all kinds of people, for all kinds of reasons, have been scattered, separated from home. We know the longing for the kind of family that is the place of our belonging. So don't quote to us. I'm just saying right now, don't quote to us Romans 13 about obeying the government. Right? Don't quote Leviticus 18:22 that men lying with men is an abomination. Don't bother. Because we're telling another kind of story. We're telling the story of Ruth promising Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. We are making a new home. Your people shall be my people. We are creating a new family. May God do to me whatever God will, if anything but death separates me from you." That's Ruth's vow about home as the place where she will never be separated from the one she loves. We tell the story about Jonathan loving David as his own soul. And the story says that Saul took David that day and would not let him return home to his father's house. See, David was separated from his family. And imagine David having to live in the king's house and hiding the truth about himself. Some of you know about that? Having to live in the king's house and having to hide the truth about himself, that he had secretly been anointed king, that he was in love with Jonathan, that he could never go home again. Think of that when you're reading his Psalm 23. The one anointed to carry out a revolution says, "Goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in God's house forever." See, David knew about separation and family and a larger definition of home. There is a poem by Warsan Shire that has been going around. It's been posted on Facebook. Warsan Shire is a British Somali poet, and she tries to wake us up to the confusing, jarring experience of separation and family and home. Her poem says in part, "You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains, beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles traveled mean something more than journey. No one crawls under fences. No one wants to be beaten, pitied. No one chooses refugee camps or strip searches where your body is left aching or in prison. I want to go home. But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the ocean, drown, save, be hungry, beg, forget pride. Your survival is more important. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, "Leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here." Beloved ones, this Pride Sunday is complicated and confusing because leaving home and longing for it can all get wrapped up together. And some of you don't have any trouble imagining this. You have your own stories of rejection and separation and leaving one home behind in hopes of finding a new one. You know the pain of home chasing you away and the courage it takes to find, to make a new one. So I apologize this morning for not being able to straighten it all out, to make sense of the jarring images of this day, competing pictures of pride and celebration on the one hand and terror and shame on the other. I'm sorry I can't wrap it all up in some nice, neat, rainbow-colored package. I wish I could. I can say this. We never thought, we never dared to believe, we were told by politicians, allies, not even to imagine that in our lifetime, 25 same-sex couples would be legally married in this sanctuary. I can tell you the politicians that told me not to make that an issue, because it's never going to happen in our lifetime. We have photographic evidence. We have photographic evidence of the power that is already at work within us to accomplish far more than any of us could ask or imagine. So we can sing, "We shall overcome" this morning because we've seen it. And we sing it this morning because there's so much more overcoming yet to be done. On this Pride Sunday, "We shall overcome" is at the same time a celebration and a commitment that we make. It's a song calling us to show up. We may not know who or what is calling us. We may not know exactly what to do when we get there, but show up anyway, because never underestimate the power of showing up. And thank God this morning you did. In the confusion, with the jarring images all around us, with all the mixed messages of this day, you showed up to sing together one more time, "We shall overcome." And today as we sing, if you hear that voice calling you to show up one more time, show up all over again, for God's sake, for your sake, for the world's sake, do not harden your hearts.